Have you ever wondered why, in the middle of a noisy party, with loud music, flashing lights, and dozens of people talking around you, you suddenly feel deeply alone? Why, paradoxically, the more people surround you, the greater the feeling of isolation can become? This experience is not only yours, there is something deeply revealing in this phenomenon that we collectively experience but rarely discuss. This contradiction invites us to explore an uncomfortable truth about our contemporary society and about the very nature of human consciousness. Why do some people, especially those with a higher degree of self-awareness, often feel the need to escape large crowds? What does this behavior, often labeled as antisocial or introverted, really tell us about the human condition in the 21st century? Is there a hidden wisdom in this distance that our hyper-connected culture and constant exposure try to suppress? For millennia, human beings lived in small groups. Our minds evolved in communities where we knew each person by name, where we shared stories around campfires, where every interaction had context and meaning. A Paleolithic hunter-gatherer interacted closely with perhaps 150 people throughout his entire life. This is the so-called Dunbar number, the theoretical cognitive limit of people with whom we can maintain stable relationships. Our ancestors rarely experienced the sensation of being surrounded by dozens or hundreds of complete strangers. When that happened, it usually meant danger, a hostile encounter with another tribe, a war situation. Our neurobiology was shaped to interpret anonymous crowds as potentially threatening. This ancestral programming remains in our brain like an old software running on modern hardware. The agricultural revolution, about 12,000 years ago, began to drastically change this scenario, creating villages and eventually cities. The Industrial Revolution accelerated the process, producing metropolises where millions of strangers coexist in physical proximity but emotional distance. And finally, the digital revolution created an even deeper paradox. We are simultaneously more connected than ever through our screens and more disconnected in our physical interactions. We may have thousands of online friends whom we have never met in person, while barely knowing the name of the neighbor who lives next door. This radical transformation in our social structure happened in an evolutionary blink of an eye, leaving our internal psychology out of sync with our external environment. When we enter an environment with dozens or hundreds of people, such as a party or a shopping mall, our brain is flooded with a volume of social data that it was never designed to process. Each unfamiliar face, each fragment of conversation captured, each movement in the periphery of our vision demands cognitive resources. Our attention system, developed to track predators on the savannah or identify edible fruits in the forest, becomes overloaded by the excess of irrelevant stimuli. This sensory overload has a real energy cost for our brain, which consumes about 20% of all our body's energy, despite representing only 2% of our body mass. The people we call conscious are often those with nervous systems that are more sensitive to this overload. It's not that they are antisocial, but rather that their perceptual apparatus registers more inputs from the environment and processes this information more deeply. Psychologist Elaine Aron described this phenomenon as the characteristic of the highly sensitive person, present in approximately 15 to 20% of the population. These people have an increased ability to notice subtleties, process information more deeply, are more easily stimulated, and have more intense emotional responses. In evolutionary terms, this heightened sensitivity may be a valuable adaptation, allowing greater caution and a richer perception of the environment. But in the artificial context of large human crowds, this same trait can become a disadvantage. When a highly conscious person enters a crowded party, they do not experience just the music and conversations, but also pick up microfacial expressions, subtle changes in tone of voice, unspoken interpersonal tensions, and countless other signals that go unnoticed by many. It is like trying to watch dozens of movies simultaneously, each one telling a complex emotional story. The result is often a feeling of exhaustion and overload that others may not understand. Why are you so tired? We just went to a party. This misunderstanding increases isolation, creating a cycle of social withdrawal. Modern technology has dramatically intensified this problem. Our parties are now not only physical gatherings, but also arenas of digital performance. Every moment is potentially photographed, filmed, shared online, commented on, and eternalized. The constant presence of smartphones means we are never really just here, but always partially there on some invisible digital stage. This additional layer of social complexity demands even more cognitive and emotional resources, especially for those already predisposed to heightened self-awareness. But there is something even deeper happening beyond mere sensory overload or digital performance pressure. The withdrawal of conscious people from hyper-stimulating environments reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of authentic human connection that our society desperately tries to ignore. In our consumer culture, we have been conditioned to believe that more is better in almost every aspect of life. More friends, more connections, more experiences, more stimuli. Social networks reinforce this mentality, rewarding the quantity of connections over their quality. The algorithms that govern these platforms favor content that triggers fast and intense emotional reactions, not deep reflection or genuine bonding. In contrast to this dominant model, people who consistently seek solitude or more limited and deeper social interactions are consciously or unconsciously resisting a powerful cultural narrative. They intuit that true human connection is not scalable. It requires full attention, authentic presence, and mutual vulnerability, qualities that inevitably dilute in mass environments. The more people present in an interaction, the more superficial it tends to be. This is not an elitist criticism of casual socialization, but simply an observation about human cognitive and emotional limits. In pre-industrial societies, people often lived their entire lives in small communities where the depth of relationships compensated for their limited number. A medieval peasant might know only a few dozen people, but knew them intimately, through countless interactions over decades. Today, we may interact superficially with thousands of people throughout life, but rarely develop the kind of deep knowledge that was common in earlier eras. We gained breadth, but lost depth. When we observe contemplative cultures around the world, from Buddhist monks to Christian mystics, from Stoic philosophers to yoga practitioners, we find a recurring theme: the value of deliberate solitude as a path to self-knowledge and wisdom. These traditions do not promote pathological isolation, but rather a balance between social engagement and reflective withdrawal. They recognize that certain truths can only be accessed when we temporarily step away from social noise and create space to hear our inner voice. This ancient wisdom is being rediscovered by modern neuroscience, which demonstrates how periods of disengagement are essential for memory consolidation, emotional processing, and creativity. Maybe what we are interpreting as social phobia or introversion is in many cases an intuitive form of psychic self-preservation. People who regularly flee socially dense environments may be protecting their mental integrity and capacity for authentic connection in a world that constantly threatens to fragment our attention and dilute our interactions. Their behavior does not represent a flaw to be corrected, but a healthy adaptation to an increasingly artificial and unbalanced social environment. The real irony is that many of the people who avoid crowded parties and socially stimulating environments are often the most capable of forming deep and meaningful connections in more appropriate contexts. Their withdrawal does not reflect a lack of interest in others, but rather a desire for higher quality interactions. They prefer an intimate conversation with a close friend to dozens of superficial exchanges with acquaintances. They prefer to truly listen to one person rather than partially hear many. This preference is not a social deficit, but a conscious choice to prioritize depth over breadth. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, in what moments of your life do you feel this tension between the cultural imperative of constant socialization and your inner desire for deeper and more meaningful connections? Have you ever felt that peculiar exhaustion after a social event, not just physical, but existential, as if something essential had been drained from you? I know that many of us carry this experience in silence, perhaps for fear of seeming antisocial or inadequate, in a world that celebrates extroversion and perpetual connectivity. But your experiences are valid and probably shared by more people than you imagine. Share in the comments. I feel the need to move away from crowds when. Your voice may help create a space where we can honestly discuss this fundamental tension in our modern social lives. A particularly revealing example of this dynamic can be observed in the behavior of many of the greatest thinkers, artists, and innovators in history. People like Isaac Newton, Emily Dickinson, Marcel Proust, Nikola Tesla, and more recently figures like Bill Gates and J.K. Rowling all demonstrated tendencies towards social withdrawal and a preference for solitude during significant periods of their lives. It is no coincidence that profound contributions to human knowledge often emerge from minds that value deliberate isolation. Genuine creativity and original thinking require distance from consensual narratives and prevailing social expectations. It is hard to hear your own voice when you are constantly immersed in the voices of others. Historical perspective helps us understand another aspect of this issue: the relationship between elevated consciousness and sensitivity to social context. In pre-modern societies, the role of the shaman, oracle, or prophet was often assigned to individuals who demonstrated increased sensitivity to social and environmental dynamics. These people perceived patterns and connections that others did not notice, often withdrawing from the community for periods of contemplation before returning with valuable insights. In a certain sense, the highly conscious person who withdraws from socially dense environments is participating in an ancient human tradition of contemplative retreat. When we examine non-Western cultures, we often find a more nuanced understanding of the need for solitude. In Chinese Taoist philosophy, the concept of Wu Wei, or non-action, emphasizes the importance of periods of stillness and disengagement to achieve harmony. In Japanese culture, the term ma describes the empty space between objects, pauses in music, or moments of silence in conversation, all valued as essential elements of aesthetic and social experience. These traditions recognize that meaning does not reside only in presence and action, but also in absence and withdrawal. The pressure to socialize constantly and comfortably in large groups is a relatively recent phenomenon, closely linked to the rise of modern consumerism and the attention economy. Parties, nightclubs, mass concerts, and other high-stimulation social environments are also spaces of intense consumption. Alcohol, food, fashion, entertainment, all are sold more efficiently when people are in states of high social excitement and reduced judgment. It is no coincidence that corporations invest billions in marketing that associates their products with high-energy social experiences. The person who regularly chooses not to participate in these environments is also implicitly resisting a powerful mechanism of consumption induction, the tendency to pathologize the desire for solitude or limited social interaction serves specific economic interests. A person satisfied with a quiet afternoon reading a book, walking in nature, or speaking intimately with a close friend consumes less than someone constantly chasing new, stimulating social experiences in commercial environments. The medicalization of traits such as introversion or heightened sensory sensitivity turns natural preferences into conditions to be treated, often with profitable pharmaceutical products. I am not suggesting a deliberate conspiracy, but rather that our economic system naturally favors and amplifies behaviors that generate more consumption. But perhaps the deepest and most disturbing aspect of this issue is how our modern society systematically devalues the very introspection needed to develop self-awareness. From childhood, we are trained to keep our attention externally oriented on the next test, the next game, the next social achievement. Children who show tendencies towards silent contemplation or solitary play are often considered problematic, needing more socialization. Our educational system, designed in the industrial era, rewards conformity and extroverted engagement over deep reflection. Our professional performance evaluations emphasize interpersonal skills and teamwork over contemplative capacity or original insight. The result is a culture that produces externally oriented individuals, highly responsive to social cues and external expectations, but often disconnected from their deepest inner truths. We excel at navigating complex social dynamics, but struggle to answer fundamental questions like, what really matters to me? Or what kind of life do I truly want? This outward orientation creates a particular vulnerability to social and commercial manipulation. When our sense of identity and worth is primarily anchored in external validation, we become ideal consumers, always seeking the next product, experience, or social affirmation that promises to fill the internal void. People who regularly seek solitude and limit their exposure to socially dense environments are, in a sense, performing an act of political resistance, even if they do not conceive of it in those terms. They are affirming the value of inner life in an economy that monetizes external attention. They are prioritizing self-awareness in a culture that encourages constant distraction. They are choosing depth in a system that rewards breadth. By making these choices, they implicitly challenge some of the fundamental premises of our contemporary social organization. The true tragedy is that many highly conscious people internalize the dominant view that pathologizes their natural behavior. They see themselves as socially deficient, anxious, or inadequate because they do not enjoy environments that most people seem to appreciate. They feel guilty for needing time alone after social interactions. They question their worth because their connection needs differ from the model promoted by the dominant culture. This internalization of external judgment causes unnecessary suffering and prevents them from recognizing the inherent wisdom of their natural orientation. The truth is that different neurobiological constitutions require different social environments in order to flourish. Just as some plants thrive in direct sunlight while others require partial shade, some humans develop better in high stimulation social environments, while others need more quiet and limited interaction. Neither pattern is inherently superior or healthier. Each represents an adaptive strategy with specific advantages and disadvantages depending on the context. Historically, successful human communities integrated diverse personality types, benefiting from the talents of those oriented toward broad social coordination, as well as the contributions of those inclined toward observation, reflection, and deep specialization. Extroverted hunters worked alongside introspective toolmakers. Socially skillful leaders collaborated with observant healers, each contributing uniquely to collective well-being. This cognitive and temperamental diversity was a critical adaptive advantage for our species. The problem arises when a society begins to disproportionately value one type of orientation over others. When the cultural ideal becomes the always connected networker, always available, always performing, we lose the unique benefits that emerge from more contemplative and introverted minds. We artificially reduce the cognitive diversity that has been central to human creativity and resilience. A revealing parallel can be found in agriculture. For centuries, farmers cultivated diverse crop varieties adapted to specific local conditions. This agricultural biodiversity provided resilience against pests, disease, and climate change. In the 20th century, however, industrial agriculture began favoring monocultures of standardized high-yield varieties. These monocultures are efficient by certain narrow metrics, but extremely vulnerable to unforeseen threats. Likewise, a culture that promotes a narrow model of social behavior and human cognition may seem efficient for certain short-term economic goals, but loses the resilience that comes from cognitive and behavioral diversity. Looking to the future, we can imagine a society that recognizes and values the innate diversity of human temperaments. Such a society would create spaces for high-energy social interaction and spaces for quiet contemplation without implicitly privileging one over the other. It would recognize that different types of contributions emerge from different conditions, and that collective wisdom requires both vibrant social engagement and deep solitary reflection. In such a society, no one would feel inadequate for preferring an intimate conversation with a close friend over a loud party. No one would be diagnosed with a disorder for needing recovery after intense social interaction. No one would be pressured to perform a type of sociability that drains their energy and compromises their authenticity. Instead, each person would be encouraged to discover and honor their own natural pattern of social engagement and solitary contemplation, recognizing that this pattern is not a flaw, but an expression of their singular humanity. This vision is not merely utopian, but pragmatically necessary. As we move into an era of advanced artificial intelligence and widespread automation, uniquely human contributions become increasingly centered on qualities that emerge from our inner life: original creativity, ethical judgment, contemplative wisdom, and authentic emotional connection. Ironically, the very qualities often cultivated by those who regularly withdraw from social tumult are the ones that may become most valuable in our collective future. Perhaps we should therefore reconsider our understanding of elevated consciousness and the social behavior associated with it. What if avoiding large crowds is not a deficit to be corrected or an anxiety to be overcome, but an intelligent adaptive strategy for certain minds in certain contexts? What if the person who consistently prefers more limited and deeper interactions is intuitively protecting a valuable cognitive and emotional capacity, increasingly rare in our hyper-connected world? This does not mean romanticizing extreme isolation or pathological social withdrawal, which can certainly indicate real suffering. But it suggests that we should be much more cautious about pathologizing preferences for limited socialization, especially when these arise naturally and do not cause significant suffering to the person. The line between legitimate mental disorder and simple neurological diversity is often determined more by arbitrary cultural norms than by objective science. The real challenge, both individually and collectively, is to develop discernment about which forms and quantities of social interaction genuinely nourish us, energize us, and expand our awareness versus which drain us, fragment us, and reduce our presence. This discernment requires honest self-reflection and a willingness to question prevailing social expectations. It requires courage to set boundaries that protect our mental and emotional integrity in a world that constantly seeks to capture and monetize our attention. If you often find yourself overwhelmed in socially dense environments, if you regularly need time alone to process experiences and regain balance, if your most meaningful interactions typically happen in intimate conversations rather than large social events, know that these patterns do not reflect any fundamental deficiency. They are valid expressions of a natural variation in human experience with deep roots in our biology, psychology, and even ancient spiritual traditions. Your desire for depth over breadth, for quality over quantity in human connections is not something to be overcome, but a wisdom to be honored. In fact, as our society becomes more saturated with information, more dominated by technology-mediated interactions, and more oriented toward constant external performance, the ability to withdraw deliberately, to stay in touch with one's inner voice, and to cultivate full presence in direct human interactions becomes not just a personal preference, but an act of preserving one's own humanity. If these reflections touched something you have been feeling, but perhaps hadn't found words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space of dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. As we move forward into the digital age, with its dazzling promises and subtle dangers, we will increasingly need spaces where we can honestly explore the complexity of being human in this unique historical moment. Spaces where not everything needs to be optimized, monetized, or performed for an audience. Spaces that honor both our need for connection and our need for contemplation. Spaces that recognize that true wisdom emerges not only from constant engagement with the external world, but also from the attentive stillness that allows us to hear the whispers of our own consciousness. Perhaps, in the end, the conscious person who regularly steps away from crowds and seeks more limited and deeper interactions is not fleeing reality, but moving toward a more authentic one. A reality not defined primarily by external approval or conformity with social expectations, but by fidelity to one's essential nature and to the kinds of connection that truly nourish the soul. In this sense, their withdrawal does not represent a failure to adapt to the modern world, but a successful adaptation that preserves what is most valuable in the human experience: even when external conditions do not naturally favor it, this may be, after all, the hidden truth revealed by the behavior of those who consistently avoid socially dense environments, that genuine human consciousness in all its depth and subtlety requires specific conditions to flourish, that our minds are not infinitely adaptable machines capable of thriving in any environment, but delicate ecologies that depend on careful balances between stimulation and reflection, connection and contemplation, engagement and withdrawal. And that honoring these balances, even when it means swimming against the dominant cultural current, is not just a matter of personal preference, but of existential integrity.
You really not use a smartphone?
For many years, I just didn't have a phone. Then it became too difficult because, again, many services just demanded, like the bank or the doctor, that I have a phone. So I keep it, but I try to use it instead of being used by it. It's not on me all the time. I'm not addicted to it. I'm not checking it all the time. I try to use it as a tool.
Hello, everybody. And what I want to talk to you today about is the power to shape the world and the power to shape our future. About your power as leaders and as innovators, but also about the power of the human species as a whole. And the big question we are facing is whether AI is taking away humanity's power to control our future, or perhaps AI is giving humanity more power than ever before. And also, can we even speak about humanity, about a single humanity anymore? Or perhaps humanity in the era of AI is splitting into different groups, each with a radically different future. But before we get to AI, we have to say a few words about politics. The relatively stable liberal order of the early 21st century is collapsing. Instead of a cooperative order based on universal values, global institutions, and international laws, we are entering into a super competitive, chaotic world in which only one thing matters, and this one thing is brute force. Leaders like President Trump envision the world as a collection of fortresses, with each country separated from the others by high walls. Financial walls, like tariffs, military walls, cultural walls, and physical walls. This vision may have certain advantages, but it fails to address one key problem. Walled fortresses are seldom friendly. Thousands of years of history teach us that each national fortress would probably want a bit more security, prosperity, and territory for itself at the expense of the neighbors. And in the absence of universal values, global institutions, and international laws, how would rival fortresses resolve their disputes? For millennia, the vision of the world as a collection of fortresses always led to exactly the same outcome: a never-ending cycle of wars, with powerful empires conquering their weaker neighbors and eventually fighting each other for supremacy. This is already beginning to happen all around us. Wars of conquest, which were taboo since 1945, are coming back. Russia already sustained 1 million casualties in its attempt to conquer Ukraine and re-establish the Russian Empire. the Trump administration has already expressed imperial ambitions regarding Greenland, Panama, and even Canada, and seems to support Israel's conquest of Gaza. China, too, has its eyes on overseas expansion. The collapse of the old order is frightening, but it is also, of course, an opportunity to shape a better order. And the big question is, who will be the shapers? In the old liberal order, the ideal was that all humans would be shapers. It didn't matter whether you came from the USA or Brazil, whether you're white or black, a man or a woman, straight or gay, you had equal human dignity, and therefore, in theory at least, your views and interests counted for something. Sure, this liberal ideal was never fully realized. Ideals are not reality. But the liberal world was nevertheless a huge improvement over previous historical models. In the new post-liberal chaotic world, the ideal of equal human dignity is completely and openly abandoned. Instead of all humans trying to cooperate to shape a world that will be good for all humans, the current mantras are me first and might is right. A few powerful people in a handful of countries think that they have the right to shape the world for everyone. If you remember the meeting earlier this year between President Trump and President Zelensky at the White House, whenever Zelensky talked about things like justice or peace or territorial sovereignty of nations, President Trump interrupted him and said, "You don't have the cards. You don't have the cards." As we are meeting here in Sao Paulo to talk about the future of humanity, there are two questions for each of you to ponder. First, do you have any cards? Are there any cards in Sao Paulo? Or are all the cards in Washington, Beijing, and Moscow in the hands of people like Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin? The second question is perhaps even more important. Do you want to live in a world where the only thing that matters is cards? Is life ultimately just a card game with winners and losers? Now, I could have given the exact same speech that I gave now in 1939 or in 1914 or in countless other historical moments when humanity was on the brink of a major crisis. But this time, it's really different. Because as we ask ourselves, who will shape the new world of the 21st century, we need to take into account not only human shapers. For the first time in history, there are also non-human shapers on the planet, AIs. We might be quite close, maybe a few years, quite close to the moment when an algorithm would tell all humans, including Trump and Putin, you don't have the cards. As we enter the era of AI, I want to briefly explore here three questions. What is AI? What is the threat of AI? And how can all of you, business leaders, entrepreneurs, and innovators, help humanity not just survive, but also flourish in the era of AI? So let's start. What is AI? There is so much hype around this term, AI, that the term is now inaccurately applied to almost every machine, and it is becoming difficult to know what it really means. So let me be very, very clear. AI does not mean automation. AI means agency. AI is not a tool in our hands. AI is an independent agent capable of acting and learning and changing on its own. To be an AI, it is not enough for a machine to act independently, automatically. It must also have the capacity to learn and change by itself, to make decisions by itself, and to invent new ideas by itself. As a simple example, consider a coffee machine. If you press a button and the machine automatically makes you an espresso according to a pre-programmed procedure, this is not AI. The machine doesn't learn or create anything new by itself. But suppose that as you approach the machine, even before you press any button, the machine says to you, I've been monitoring you for the last few weeks. Based on everything I've learned about you, and based on your facial expression right now, I predict that you would like to have a double espresso with 1 spoon of sugar. So I've already made you such a cup. Here, take it. That's an AI. It learned something by itself and decided something by itself. And it is really AI if the following day the machine announces, I've now invented a new drink that I call Bespresso, and I think you would like it even better than espresso. So here, try it out. I made you a cup. The confusion about AI results in part from the term itself. The term AI has been invented decades ago as an acronym for artificial intelligence. But it is inaccurate to think about AI as an artificial intelligence if by artificial we mean something that is entirely designed and controlled by humans. AI is not artificial in this sense. So it's better perhaps to think about AI as an acronym for alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense that it's coming from outer space, it doesn't. Alien in the sense that this is a non-human intelligence, it's not even an organic intelligence. It operates on completely different inorganic lines. It therefore is able to make decisions and to invent ideas that would never occur to human beings or to any other organic animal. A famous example of this was given already back in 2016 when the AI AlphaGo defeated the human Go champion Lee Sedol in Seoul. This game became justly famous, not just because AlphaGo defeated the human champion. It was the way AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol which shocked the world. Because AlphaGo, in order to win, invented new strategies for how to play the game that never occurred to any human player in thousands of years of the history of Go. Now, as long as AI invents new ways to play games or new kinds of coffee, it doesn't seem very important. But very soon, AI will invent new military strategies, new kinds of money, and even entire ideologies and religions. Consider money and finance more generally. If you recall the 2007-2008 financial crisis, you might remember that it was largely caused or started by something called CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. CDOs were financial devices invented by a handful of mathematicians and investment wizards. These financial devices were so complex that they were almost unintelligible to most humans, including politicians and regulators. And this led to an oversight failure and a global catastrophe. Now, what happens if we now allow or even encourage AIs to invent new financial devices that will be orders of magnitude more complex than CDOs and that will be utterly unintelligible to any human being? Such devices could greatly improve financial efficiency and contribute to economic growth, and they could become the bedrock of the global financial system. But what would happen to human politics when no voter or politician is able to understand and regulate finance anymore? And what happens if after a few years of unprecedented boom, the financial system suddenly busts and there isn't a single human being on earth that is able to make sense of what is happening? Now consider the implications for something like religion. Especially, let's take as an example, religions based on texts like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. For thousands of years, Judaism granted ultimate authority not to human beings, but to texts like the Bible and the Talmud. Flesh and blood rabbis nevertheless had immense power within Jewish society for the simple reason that their holy texts could never speak for themselves. They were mute. Whenever you had a question about the text, you needed a human interpreter. Rabbis are humans who know their way around many Jewish texts, from the Bible to the latest commentaries on the Talmud. This is the source of their authority. Now, over the centuries, so many Jewish texts have been composed that not even the most learned rabbi is able to read all these texts in his or her lifetime, let alone remember everything written there. But of course, this is something that an AI can easily accomplish. AI could quickly read all the Jewish texts ever composed, remember every word in every single one of these texts, and also find patterns in the texts that have so far escaped human notice, human attention, and AI could therefore use its unprecedented scriptural understanding and knowledge to produce completely new interpretations of the Holy Word. And this, of course, is true of Christianity and Islam as well. In effect, AI can start functioning as a holy text that talks back to the faithful without any need of a human mediation. What happens to a religion of texts when the texts start talking? Now, since Judaism invests, as I said, authority in the texts, a flesh and blood rabbi cannot just ignore the scriptural arguments of an AI. And human rabbis will very soon find it very difficult to compete with AI's mastery of the Jewish canon. Even if AI is not granted formal rabbinical status, it is likely that at least some humans, including even some rabbis, would turn to an AI rabbi for scriptural guidance and inspiration. The result might be surprising new developments in very old religions or the emergence of entirely new religions. Now, these kinds of developments have enormous positive potential. They can help humanity in countless ways, from inventing new medicines to preventing catastrophic climate change. But, of course, AI also poses many threats. So let's move on to the second question of what is the threat of AI. The basic problem with AI is not that it is evil. The problem is that it is alien and therefore unpredictable and untrustworthy. At the heart of the AI race, there is a paradox of trust. Humans find it difficult to trust one another, especially as the world is becoming a collection of hostile fortresses. But the people who develop AI somehow manage to believe that we could trust the AIs. When I meet the people who lead the AI revolution, I normally ask them two questions. First, I ask them, why are you moving so fast when there are such huge risks? And the response almost everybody gives is the same. They say, we agree. We know that there are big dangers, and it would be best to proceed with more care. However, if we slow down while our competitors in the other company or in the other countries won't slow down, they will win the AI race, and the world will be dominated by the most ruthless people. We cannot trust our human competitors, so we must move as fast as possible. Then I ask the second question. Do you think you could trust the super intelligent AIs that you're developing? And the same people who just told me they can't trust their human competitors suddenly assure me that they could trust the super intelligent AIs. And this is such a paradox, because we have thousands of years of experience with human beings. We have a broad understanding of human psychology and biology, of the human craving for power, of the tricks humans use to gain power, and also of the forces that keep the human pursuit of power in check. We have also made considerable progress in finding ways to build trust between humans. 100,000 years ago, people lived in tiny bands of just a few dozen individuals and couldn't trust anybody outside their band. Today, there are nations like Brazil with hundreds of millions of citizens, and there are even bigger networks of cooperation linking all 8 billion humans on the planet. Complete strangers often grow the food we eat and invent and develop the medicines that keep us healthy. Of course, we are far from completely solving the problem of human trust, and there are still many tensions and conflicts and wars in the world. But with humans, at least we understand the challenge we are facing. In contrast, we have almost no experience with super intelligent AIs. We have just created the very first prototypes. We already know that even primitive AIs can lie, manipulate, and adopt goals and strategies that were not foreseen by their human developers. We have no idea what will happen when millions of super intelligent AIs interact with millions of humans, and it is even more difficult to predict what will happen when millions of super intelligent AIs interact with one another, creating AI societies, AI tribes. What kind of goals will they develop? What kind of tricks might they invent? True, at present, it is humans who develop the AIs, so we can try to design them in a way that will make them safe for humanity. But remember that a machine is an AI only if it is capable of learning and changing by itself, making decisions by itself, and inventing new ideas by itself. So no matter how human designs them originally, the AIs can then change in a radical and unpredictable manner. And it's a huge gamble to simply trust that these super intelligent alien intelligences will always remain our obedient servants. the humans who despair of trusting other humans, yet think they can trust these alien intelligences, may be making a very, very big mistake. Now, I know that it's sometimes hard for people to understand how AIs might escape human control. Due to the influence of science fiction, when we talk about AIs escaping our control, people tend to imagine a scenario of killer robots running in the streets, shooting people. While something like this is actually already happening in some places like Ukraine and like Gaza, this is nevertheless the wrong image. If you want to understand how AIs can escape our control, don't think about killer robots. Think about business corporations. What are corporations? Corporations like Microsoft or SpaceX or Petrobras are non-human agents. Though they don't have a body or a mind, these corporations can open bank accounts, can hire people, fire people, lobby politicians, and do many, many other things. Now, previously, this corporate agency was just a legal fiction, a fantasy of lawyers. Why? Because in practice, every decision made by Microsoft or Petrobras was actually made by some human being, not by the corporation. Every decision was made by some human executive, human shareholder, human engineer. But with AI, corporate decisions will increasingly be made by a non-human intelligence, a non-human agent. Imagine a corporation that has no human executives and no human shareholders, only AI executives and shareholders. This corporation can make billions and reshape the world. A practical question already today in 2025 is, do we want as a society to allow such things? This is a practical question. Do we as a society allow AIs to open bank accounts, to manage corporations, to trade and invest, to hire people, to lobby politicians? So let us move to the last question. How can humanity flourish in the era of AI? To survive and flourish, we need to remember two lessons from history. First, power isn't happiness. We humans have been extremely good in acquiring power, but so far we have not been very successful in translating power into happiness. That's why today we are thousands of times more powerful than in the Stone Age, but humans are not thousands of times more happy. That's also why the most powerful people in the world, like Trump and Musk and Xi and Putin, are definitely not the happiest people in the world. Secondly, to survive and flourish, we should remember also that intelligence isn't wisdom. Humans are the most intelligent animals on the planet, and at the same time, we are also the most deluded animals on the planet. No other animal can believe the kind of nonsense that humans can believe. For example, my home region of the Middle East is burning in a horrendous war, fueled in part by the most ridiculous fantasies you can imagine. Humans there, on all sides of the conflict, seriously believe that the creator of the universe commanded them to fight and kill other humans. And they also seriously believe that the creator of the universe will reward them for their violence with everlasting joy and bliss in heaven. No chimpanzee will ever believe such nonsense. But many highly intelligent humans believe it. So power isn't happiness, and intelligence isn't wisdom. AI will be more powerful and more intelligent than us. But the power of AI doesn't mean it will bring happiness, and the intelligence of AI doesn't mean that AI will be free from delusions. In fact, a super intelligence might very well be super deluded. Therefore, the big challenge for business leaders and innovators is not how to create more powerful and more intelligent technology. Rather, the challenge is how to develop the wisdom necessary to use all this power and intelligence for good purposes. How to do it? The answer is quite simple. Build more trust between humans before developing super intelligent AIs. Do you know why planet Earth is nevertheless ruled by humans and not by chimpanzees? Not because we are more intelligent than the chimpanzees. Humans rule the world because we know better than any other animal how to build trust with strangers and cooperate in very, very large numbers. We have developed this ability for thousands of years. Unfortunately, just when we need human trust more than ever before, many of our most powerful leaders are busy destroying this trust. Instead of strengthening connections between all humans, they are busy building walls between humans. If humanity is divided, AI will escape our control and will enslave or even annihilate us. On the other hand, if humanity cooperates, we can together develop AI and other technologies in a safe and responsible way. Think about AI as humanity's common child. When we educate children, we know that children learn from what we do, not from what we say. If you tell your child, don't lie, and then the child observes you lying, the child will also lie. Similarly, if you're a tech tycoon developing a super intelligent AI, and you're telling the AI, don't lie, and the AI then observes you lying, the AI will also lie. And if you tell the AI, be compassionate to people, but the AI observes you engaged in a ruthless pursuit of power, the AI will also grow up to pursue power ruthlessly without any compassion. This is why we must first solve the problem of human trust and only then develop super intelligent AI. If AI is developed in a cooperative way by compassionate and trustworthy humans, then the AI too is much more likely to grow up to be cooperative, compassionate, and trustworthy. And all of you have a role to play in that. You are leaders and innovators. Amidst the growing political chaos in the world, the business leaders and the tech innovators still have very considerable power to shape the world. So use your power to build trust between humans. Use your power to build a world which isn't just a card game between ruthless warlords. Build a world in which the dignity of everybody still counts. Thank you.
Information is the food of the mind. More information is always good for you. That's ridiculous.
You think a lot about these topics, and how do you protect yourself against the negative consequences of AI?
There are two main things. One is to get to know my own mind as well as I can. Because all these manipulations, they work by getting to know and exploit our own weaknesses. It's the oldest advice in the book. Get to know yourself better. The second thing is to keep some kind of an information diet. Lots of people have a food diet. They are very mindful of what they eat.
which is important. You know, you don't want to eat too much, it's not good for you. You don't want to eat junk food, it's not good for you. It's the same with information. Information is the food of the mind. The idea that more information is always good for you, that's ridiculous. It's like thinking that more food is always good for you. Not true. And similarly, you have to be very mindful what kind of information you're putting into your mind. If you feed your mind constantly with outrage and anger and fear, you'll get a sick mind. So you have to be very careful. Also very important, like with food, you need time to digest. Time when you don't take in more information. That's it for now, and now I need to digest.